90% of women are harassed, and women and girls are harassed in public transport in our buses and trains.
That's a very alarming number.
It's alarming, but to many women, it's 100%.
Sexual harassment as an offence in the penal code, it is about what the victim feels. A lot of women say going to office and coming back and the harassment in buses is too much. There was one bus route, there was an old conductor, and periodically in the bus he would shout in Sinhala saying, "Ganu lamayanta wadda denna epa, ganuwata wadda denna epa."
Lots of people actually waited for the bus that was branded as a harassment-free bus. So what we need is first to ensure her safety. So next is confidentiality. What we are saying is we do not want sexual harassment in our buses, in our public spaces, in our bus stands.
Talk about it properly, not just that there's so many incidents. Terrible thing to have, not like that. Talk about it so that people are aware and aware that they can stand up against it.
Hello and welcome to Leaving No One Behind, the podcast series brought to you by UNFPA Sri Lanka in collaboration with NewsFirst. This is a place for open and honest conversations based on factors that shape our everyday life, like safety, dignity, equality, and the right to move through the world free from fear. Now, today we will be talking about something that affects thousands of people on a daily basis, but for some very unfortunate reason remains unspoken of, and that is sexual and gender-based harassment on our public transport. From buses to trains, these journeys are supposed to be safe for everyone, but too often that is not quite the case. And to discuss the reason for this to happen, to look at the data, I'm incredibly honored to be joined today by two incredible guests. Bimali Amarasekara, National Program Analyst for Gender at UNFPA Sri Lanka, who works at the forefront for designing survivor-centered solutions and strengthening systems that protect as well as empower. And also we have with us Dr. Ramani Jayasundara, attorney at law, whose work has shaped policy as well as community responses to gender-based violence for over 3 decades. Now, together, we will be diving into the root causes for sexual and gender-based harassment on our public transport, the data, the real-life impacts, as well as what real action looks like on the ground. So, Bimali and Dr. Ramani, if we are ready, let's get started. Let's start off with something close to the heart. When you talk about safety, dignity, equality in public spaces, especially on buses, trains, what does it mean to you?
So safety is one aspect where women, like any other person, needs to be safe and feel safe traveling in public transport. But when you look at equality and dignity, it's for a woman not only to be safe, but know that her individuality, her agency is protected in the public transport. So it's easy to talk about safety and create safe spaces, but does it mean that women feel equally independent, equally powerful in public transport or in any public sphere? So we always say women have to be safe. Yes, of course women have to be safe, but women also need to feel the dignity and equality when they're in public spaces.
And also to speak out, like feeling empowered. So in some public spaces, especially like I think in public transport, we are in a very kind of a systemic we have this approved kind of buses. We have the private buses in Sri Lanka. We have the state-owned buses. And when women get into them, they want to go from point 1, X, to point Y, either for work or for school. And how we get there, and during that time, if they do not feel safe and they do not feel they could get into a bus because of especially on certain routes where they may have faced harassment, so then they would think twice, how am I to get to that place? Or how can I or do I need someone else to accompany me? So as agents, as Ramani said, our agents is to go by myself, feel safe, and to go and not be feel harassed is a area we think we need to really speak more about, because that's her right. Her right to access transport, her right to go to work, and her right to feel safe. And then also speak out if there is any problem, which have happen in many places, in public spaces or in our workplaces.
So, on that note, usually when we talk about sexual harassment, many people seem to view this as one isolated incident, but it's actually part of a bigger problem. So, can we unpack what exactly gender-based harassment or sexual harassment really means and how it's a part of a bigger issue?
So, when we take gender-based violence, so it is violence that is committed to a person, either to a man, a woman, or the others in our society. And that harassment, as we say, it's seen in a much more bigger dimension of power and inequalities. The power of entitlement, that you feel empowered to harass, and the other person feels disempowered to speak out. And one of the biggest things is this whole concept of power affects our relations in a different manner. So it's relational. So it's not static, it's relational. So this is one of the most key things I feel. And how we perceive when we get into transport is that we are now under the power maybe of the bus driver, or the conductors are there, then the transport authorities, but then there are also other strangers that we have to meet with.
I think it's somewhat crazy that in 2025 we are talking about this, because we've known it's been happening for decades. I mean, us, our parents, our grandparents, grandmothers, mothers have gone through this. So it's a series of connected incidents. Yeah, sure. People who have never been harassed in a bus can say it hasn't happened to me, it doesn't happen at all. But it's a series of incidents over, I don't know, maybe 75 years. But it's just not just the incident. We have to look at why it happens. And like Bimali said, we've created a culture in Sri Lanka that it's laughed at, trivialized, that it's something that every woman who goes in public transport has experienced during her life. So we don't go beyond that. We don't go beyond to understand why it takes place. It's because it's a much bigger issue than a series of incidents. And in this whole conversation, we forget that there's an individual girl, individual woman who has been traumatized by this. And sometimes when I talk about the trauma you feel when you're harassed in a bus, some people laugh at, especially men who don't often get harassed. They laugh at you. I mean, what trauma? But it's also difficult to explain because it's not a conversation we have. It's not a conversation that every woman goes through. So when you look at every woman going through this who goes in public transport, it's certainly not a series of incidents. It's a whole system that enables this to happen by trivializing and saying, what to do, that's how it is, that's how men are in buses. So that's why it's serious, and that's why in 2025, and there's so much conversation about gender equality, women's safety, women's independence, we're still talking about the same old issue of what happens to women in the bus.
Yeah, as you said, it's normalized, right? So it's so normalized that one of the research that UNFPA did, it was commissioned in 2015 and then we put out in 2017, 90% of women are harassed, and women and girls are harassed in public transport in our buses and trains.
That's a very alarming number.
It's alarming, but to many women, it's 100%. So in some of the authorities where we have discussed, they say, no, it's not 90, it's 100. And not only women, men too get harassed, but it's a much smaller percentage. And sometimes it's by men as well, not only by women. So the larger is the women and girls who face this daily, and the occurrence is quite high, daily occurrence, then weekly, monthly, and yearly. So imagine having to do that. And most of us who have traveled by bus have faced harassment.
About that 90%, Bimali, is there something that we still miss even after looking at the numbers? Is there something that we still miss to read between the lines?
So one thing is, it's so normalized that nobody reports. Very few reports. I shouldn't say nobody, no, very few report. Because we have about 4% to 5% that report to police. And actually, police have taken a much greater stand in reporting, highlighting the fact we need to report. There are service providers who support. You can call helplines. The Ministry of Women has like 1930. There are helplines that ask you to call, and the hotline and police. So like last year, of those who reported, now 2023, about 300 incidents were reported to police. But that is that 5%. Or, I was talking to you about.
Yeah.
That's the reported cases that actually go to police. But the rest do not. Report is normalized. You sometimes may tell a friend, and then you say, like Ramani said, what's to be done?
What to do?
This happens, right, Ramani? So,
Yeah, when you look at the story that is not told is what happens in between the incidents. So it's the violation a woman feels immediately. And like Bimali said, the fear and the shame to complain. Because, sexual harassment as an offense in the penal code, it is about what the victim feels. So something that doesn't make Bimali uncomfortable might make me uncomfortable. So how do you explain that? You go to the police, say so-and-so did this to me in the bus, and this is how I felt. So you need a huge amount of sensitivity at every point. How do you tell the conductor? And conductor will say, I mean, this is the hackneyed story you have now. So we don't talk enough about the fear, the shame, and also how it limits women. So that is why a lot of younger women are accompanied by fathers and brothers and mothers and husbands. And this is also one big reason for low participation of women in employment. A lot of women say going to office and coming back and the harassment in buses is too much. So I'm not going to work every day. So the repercussions we don't talk enough because it's just a thing that happens in the bus. Why should we talk about the bigger picture? But that is what's between the lines.
So what starts off as one thing spirals into a whole different thing, just like it said, I mean, even for the labor market. Now, a short while ago, we mentioned the word power in this conversation, and power dynamics have a huge role to play when it comes to sexual and gender-based harassment. And this comes in various forms, right? I mean, age, sex, and maybe social status. Can we talk about how these power dynamics affect, how they shape forms of harassment and how it helps harassment persist in society as well as in public transport especially?
I think it breeds inequality. So power brings in the dimension where you feel one person is not equal to the other, right? So one of the biggest things in public transport is the harassment is largely through strangers. Whereas like if you say take domestic, it's a person you know. If you take domestic violence or in your own home, it's from people you know. But when you go in the public transport area, it's strangers. And there is also many research have backed up this. And also like what Ramani said, Central Bank actually put this report and they said public transport harassment is one of the reasons for the lack of women in the employment, in labor force participation. There's a 40% gap. When we take the labor force participation of men and women, there's a 40% gap and it's declining. So it's declined and it's declined really further since the economic crisis. So we see the bigger challenge now. And power, because power, we are in a patriarchal society, most societies are patriarchal, but there it's where we see gender equality is essential to ensure balance of power. But to bring that balance, it's also to ensure, like, scales, you're like this, you have to bring the scale. So we need affirmative action where women are encouraged to report, where there's a code of conduct for bus crews, and where a certain way of behavior is the accepted behavior for transport sector authorities who man those buses. Then also the unacceptability of strangers to do whatever they wish just because they see a schoolgirl who is not empowered to speak. and we see the school girl as being one of the most disempowered or vulnerable victims who access transport, especially for her education, who is liable to be harassed and experience harassment. So the power dynamics, I think, is very it's a dynamic area, so it's relational to different areas of unpacking this whole thing.
When you try to understand power as it leads to gender-based violence, it's sometimes not easy. I think power comes with a sense of entitlement and creation of excuses when gender-based violence happens. So, for example, sexual harassment in transport. So, understanding why a perpetrator does that, not because he's sleepy, not because he's drunk, not because he's cold, but because he feels entitled. I think that is what we have to address, that get the message across that you are not entitled to harass a woman in a bus. And I feel that we talk about stopping harassment, but we don't go into the root cause sometimes as to why people do it. So that's why it keeps happening. It's difficult. I mean, it has to come from a school education, I think. And sometimes people use things like shaming perpetrators. I mean, it works in one incident, but will it work again? I'll tell you a story. I think UNFPA organized about 15 years back a training on sexual harassment in buses for bus drivers and conductors. So they gather about 200 bus drivers and conductors, and I also did training with Dr. Vijay Jatileka. So we talked to them about sexual harassment in the bus, and they were surprised. Many of them didn't know it happened, and we actually mimed how it happens, and they were horrified. So they understood it happens, and they wanted to address it. So they went back to their bus routes, and we kept getting messages that we found somebody showing dirty pictures to girls, and we hammered him. We found a man touching a woman, and we hammered him. And in Sinhala, it's hondata gahuwa. So then we had to call them back because they realized it was wrong, but it was about a specific incident. So the reaction was, okay, one perpetrator hit him, beat him up. So we had to explain that that's not how it's going to change. That you can't beat up a criminal, you have to take proper action. But also just beating up perpetrators is not going to give a long-term solution. I remember when I was very young, before sexual harassment in transport was not talked about even, we used to be scared going in buses because there were, as young as 10, there were people who would touch and do various things. There was one bus route, there was an old conductor, and periodically in the bus, he would shout in Sinhala, saying, "Ganu lamainta wadda denna epa, ganuwata wadda denna epa, ganu langin hettu wenna epa, ganun attapata gana epa." And throughout the bus route, he used to talk, and we would feel so safe. So I don't know where he got it from, but he created an environment that there was no harassment, and women felt safe. So that is what has to be done, not reacting to each individual incident, because then we'll be reacting for the rest of our lives. So how do we create an environment that women feel and are safe in public transport? I think that is where the whole issue
and want to access transport.
Exactly.
Because they feel safe. So just like what Ramani said, we had actually, at one time, it was a national campaign. We branded buses. And this is the same thing. And this bus branding, we had to train the drivers. And those buses, and also UNFPA has done branding of buses after that as well, because we have continued this journey. It's the journey we started some time ago, but we are coming. We have continued this journey. And during that time too, one of the findings was women, the productivity in those buses, the income increased because lots of people actually waited for the bus that was branded as a harassment-free bus, because the message was violence against women affects us all. Act now, stop violence against women. So people were actually waiting for that bus. Those buses were asked to go on hires because it was seen as a socially, friendly an important message being carried. So people felt happy to be on that bus.
Such a big change.
It was a change.
Yeah.
There was a change in those 19 buses that were branded across Sri Lanka. And we found that because of that, they were actually requesting us to, brand them again. But that was a campaign, because we do have various campaigns, and as part of that. So now actually we can't brand. We actually want to do that. Recently there are notifications on buses to be branded only the front and the back. This is a transport sector. There's the policies. But one of the important things is to create that ability to now make sure these buses, we don't tolerate harassment. Zero tolerance. If we could stop smoking in our public spaces and buses, why can't we stop harassment? To women, especially to women, and to everyone. We are all human. We all need to be able to treat it equally and be able to get to the place where we are going harassment free. And that's one of the stands actually we have taken also leading here, because we have also spoken to Transport Sector Authority, the Ministry of Transport, Ministry of Women, and where we are actually putting into training of transport sector crews. So we have continued this journey that we began several years ago, and we have continued to strengthen institutionally as well to be stronger.
Now, the UNFPA often has the survivor-centric approach when it comes to sexual and gender-based harassment. In the context of public transport, what exactly does that look like? And how does it make survivors feel heard, seen, and understood?
When we take the survivor-centered approach, so one of the first angle is safety. So if a survivor reports a certain kind of violence or experiences that violence, I may be a bystander. So how am I to maybe distract this situation in a safe manner? So safety in public transport is essential. We do not want to create harm. Like the do no harm. So we don't want harm. We don't want further violence to happen. So what we need is first to ensure her safety. So next is confidentiality. So confidentiality is something now everyone in the bus will know, but then what happened? But some people may not know the intricate, the name. To actually, when we a survivor-centered approach will not be putting her name in every newspaper and every tabloid and every news article. Confidentiality is important so that we do not re-victimize the victim survivor. So this is very important. The third angle we would do is respect. So respect the survivor's right to report, to access whatever angle, if it's a legal case, because some don't want to go for legal action. So respect that survivor's right to decide and treat that person, the survivor, with respect. Because not bash her or blame her is because of what you wore. Or it's the night time. In some of the cases, they have, I think when you take in cases in India, the Nirbhaya case, where there was a gang rape, it was noted that it's the night time, the time of the night, but it was not very late. She was actually going with her boyfriend too. So these little intricate details. So respect the survivor. Then finally is non-discrimination. Do not discriminate in that situation. You can be from different race, you can be a different language, speak a different language, you may be a person of a different sexual orientation, you may be a young person, an elderly person. So whoever you may be, you have the right to not to be discriminated. So your case to be heard, especially when you go to police and when you report. And if you go to another service provider, I think these are fundamentals of the survivor-centered approach and something we would speak on.
I think fundamentally, practically what it means is, if someone's getting harassed in a bus, does that person, one, feel safe to speak up? Is she confident that if she speaks up, there will be instant recognition that she's being harassed, despite of what she was wearing, what color she is, or whatever? Will people support her? And will she have the confidence that everybody won't start bashing up the perpetrator, because then she's witnessing and she has started this whole violent act. So I think that is what we talk about survivor-centric. And then, like Bimali said, Will she be forced to make a police complaint? And finally, can she get down from the bus in dignity and go along her way without people talking about it, without being scared that people will follow, without being pushed to go to the police, without knowing what will happen. So I think the essence, the practical essence of a survivor-centric approach is that how does a woman who's facing harassment feel? And we are always talking about dignity and safety and being treated properly.
And also when you access the services, because we have services of counseling, we have legal assistance and free legal aid. Then there is, if you need further support, kind of where you would have like psychosocial kind of more support angles, as Mitrupiya say, in health sector, hospitals. So we have service providers at different areas. So where the survivors' experience is taken as a important area where we do not belittle it, but we actually take time to listen to the case and what happened, and respect that survivor's decision. So that is very important.
Well, I don't think that women are actually wanting to make police complaints, wanting to go to court, because that's a traumatic experience in itself. They just want to be free of harassment in the past. So how do we get there? I mean, it's great that we have a law. It's really great that we have a law. It's great that police are aware. It's great that you can make a police complaint and the police will file a case against the perpetrator. But when you look at it from a woman's perspective, all that is great. But does she want to go through all that?
Can this just not happen altogether?
Exactly. Can she just go in the
Yeah,
bus,
yeah.
mind
That's
her
such-
own business,
Put it
wear what
simply.
she
Yeah,
wants,
that's right.
and just get down and go on along her way? So I think that's where we have to. But all those things are really important to raise attention that this is wrong. But ultimately, we are aiming at that. No?
Yeah, we are aiming at zero tolerance.
Yeah.
No, what we are saying is we do not want sexual harassment in our buses, in our public
trains.
spaces, in our bus stands. Women should be able to go as men do too. Men do not face that form of harassment. There may be a few, but very few. So women too need to be treated in the same level, to be looked on at the same level of gender equality. So that has to change, where women are treated as equal in buses, in public spaces, and so that we can access, knowing that we will go from point X to point Y without facing any form of harassment or words or eve teasing or anything being told to a woman just because she is a woman. You see, that is the important fact.
And it's also not about overly special treatment. It's pointless having spaces for women, buses only for women, because these are they're good as temporary measures, but not in the long run, because we are then not addressing the real cause of sexual harassment. I mean, I remember when we were young, there were women-only buses driven by women, conductors were women. They were great, but at some point the government didn't have enough resources and they were stopped. Then you're back in the general buses, back to being harassed. So the temporary measures are great, but they're not the be-all and end-all solution for this.
So as someone who takes the bus, I actually know what bystand action, I mean, it can change a lot of things, right? But the problem here is that many people are afraid to intervene. Whenever they see a woman being harassed, they just pretend like they didn't see it because they don't want to get involved in more trouble. So what does bystand action in the context of Sri Lanka look like, and how can we help people understand how important bystand action is, and how can we empower them to step in more confidently if they ever see a woman being harassed on a bus or train?
I think bystand action differs from the space and type of violence. So we won't talk about bystand action when there's domestic violence. But looking at bystander intervention action in harassment in public transport, I think there's a range, because often the harassment is immediate and it doesn't start as grave. So just somebody saying, move aside, take my seat, what are you doing, move away. Simple words like that make a huge difference, because when you look at how sexual harassment happens in buses, like I said, it's small, it's insidious, it's hidden. So just somebody saying, or when a woman looks uncomfortable, having the guts to ask, are you all right? Do you want my seat? Makes a huge difference. So there are people doing that now, much more so than when we were young, but still not enough. And like you said, it's like, not my problem. I can't get involved in it. So I think we need to get the message across that it's not a major involvement. You're not going to be hauled before court to be a witness. It's just a few words saying, do you want to move? You don't even have to confront the perpetrator, but make it known that somebody else has seen it. And just by asking someone to move. I remember once that happened to me when I was a schoolgirl, and this man and this young schoolboy said, "Akke metanin vaadi wenna," and gave me his seat. That was all that was needed. That guy quietly went off. So it's that all that's all bystander action needs to be in our contexts.
Yeah, definitely. So it's like you have to think of ways to distract. Distract, if you see, and this is very important when we talk of prevention. So prevention of sexual harassment is very, very important, because once you encounter or experience, and it can be very grave, it can be from just a touching to much, much graver forms of harassment. And there have been women who have been raped also in a bus. So it can be very grave. So we need to also ensure, okay, if you're the last person to get down, make sure if there's another woman sleeping, fallen asleep, or a man, wake them up. That responsibility. This is also our responsibility. And how do we see that? And then if there's something, delay that action. Don't sit there. Come here. Don't move forward. Distract. Then you can also, as Ramani said, take my seat, ring the bell, or say, okay, don't you think you need to get down, or you have to put something into that space. And if a conductor or like an authority, they are in authority there, so they actually know who the harassers are. In some of the transport authority, we say they know who the people that harass. They know that. And those people sometimes they too have a fear of sometimes intervention. So the modality, what we say, is tell someone else in the bus. You see that, ask them to get down. And even the bus conductor, keep your, be safe. Women, girls, mindful of your purses, he says. Now, moment the person gets in, who in Sinhala they say jack gahane, be careful of your purse. Now, he is not saying why he's got on, but he's just giving warning signs. So these are messages, announcements from public transport hubs. Harassment is not tolerated in our spaces, in our buses. So from both sides, and the responsibility of all those who access public transport, to, if you do notice, make some form of intervention and say, are you okay? So.
Yeah, and eventually we'll come to a place where women will be quite confident to complain. Conductors will be quite confident to say, don't get on my bus, you dirty man. So, I mean, it's incremental. No? You start small with simple gestures, but addressing the problem properly. And then it creates an environment where stronger action is possible.
So before we wrap up today's conversation, if there is a commuter who is watching this conversation, a policymaker, or simply just someone who wants to make a safer space for everyone in society, what's the message you would give them on how to get started on getting this? I mean, it's already on the road, but we need to, push it more in order to create a harassment-free society. So what's the message that you would give them?
I would say, well, one thing is, if you see a form of harassment, don't ignore it, because it's our responsibility. That's to the commuter. But to actually, and also Get to know your helplines, who you can call and intervene. The transport sector authorities have helplines, like the National Transport Commission, 1955 is their helpline. Women's helpline is 1938. The police helpline is 109. Get to know who you can call at that point or message. And also to policymakers. Let's really make our institutions, especially in the transport sector, gender responsive and foster a culture of equality, respect, and gender equality, where we see the importance of women and men engaging in our spaces as dignified persons who do not deserve to be harassed just because they have to access, and I repeat, have to access public transport.
Yeah, for me, one part is prevention, the other part is addressing the issue. Prevention is we just need to talk about it everywhere, in school, in bus stands, in trains, in buses, on radio, on television. We have to talk, in parliament, we have to talk about it. Talk about it properly, not just that there's so many incidents, terrible thing to happen, not like that. Talk about it so that people are aware and aware that they can stand up against it. On the other side, in redressal, like Bimali said, institutions have to take responsibility that one, it doesn't happen, including having punitive measures. If your employee is caught sexually harassing someone in the bus, have an inquiry.
Yes.
And also then service providers like the police, the transport authorities, not to trivialize it. If you hear about one incident, act on it. So from largely from the state side and the actual action. But if we talk about it, people will act against it and will eventually create a culture where women can talk about it and feel safe.
So basically, sexual and gender-based harassment, it's not just a part of the whole process, it's definitely preventable. So the more we talk about it, the more we act, we'll be breaking that silence that keeps that harassment going in society. So to any of our viewers out there, if you are a survivor, if you've ever felt unheard, unseen, misunderstood, just know that you're not alone and you do not have to stay silent. There are plenty of ways of seeking help, and that's exactly what our conversation must have made you understand today. So a big thank you to Bimali and Dr. Ramani for joining us today and sharing your insights and experience. Until next time, let's keep this conversation going and let's make sure to leave no one behind. See you next time.